It Doesn't Have to Be Crazy at Work by Jason Fried and David Hansson. This book attempts to discuss a strategy for working both effectively, but also keeping the worker in mind and having a good balance at work. Number 1, quiet and focus are essential to getting good work done. Treating the workplace as a library where there are rooms for discussion and chat and relaxing, but also areas of just quiet, really keeps focus intact. And the reason that focus is so important is if you have 1 hour to do your work, are you going to do it effectively? How about compared to 5-minute sections with interruptions in between each of them? Not only are you going to take much longer to finish your work, the quality of your work might suffer. Therefore, the quality of your work time is more important than having lots of work time. Another item that's discussed is to stop being so available, stop being so easy to distract. And one cause of this is to stop communicating with others so quickly. For example, if you get an email, do you answer it right away? Now, if you answer it right away, and I learned this a couple years ago, communicating with you becomes cheap when all someone has to do is email you and they'll get an answer back immediately. You want to protect your focus, and one way of doing that is to only answer email at certain times, so you're not just interrupted constantly every 5 minutes. Another example, and I think this is very relatable for a lot of people, is to block off time that's protected from meetings, employee interactions, emails, etc. Just your time of quiet where you can do the most important work. Now, some people just don't have many meetings, so it doesn't really matter. But I think a lot of people, especially in upper management, they just get bogged down by meeting after meeting after meeting. And it seems like even though they have important long-term items to address, they never do it because they're just always in meetings. And blocking off time protects you, so you can do meetings that you need, but you can also just block out the meetings that aren't important, or you'll get around to it when it is important enough. Number 2, get over hustle culture. The authors argue, just do a good day and then stop. Now, if you're not familiar, hustle culture is the opposite of this. It is to work very hard, very long hours, work after your day job is over on a side hustle, try to get to the top by overworking everyone. And the authors argue, just do good work and stop. You don't need to overwork. Now, there are some niche industries or fields where maybe you have to really kill yourself overworking to get ahead. But those are actually more the exceptions, the authors argue. You don't always need to push yourself out of your comfort zone as well. It's okay to be comfortable at work. You don't need to have crazy growth either. And stable and steady growth is more sustainable long-term than having this crazy growth and instability that comes with that. Besides, in a lot of companies, having crazy growth really means you work a lot and you probably don't benefit very much either. So there's not much reason or incentive to work really hard for crazy growth. You kind of just hurt yourself in the process. Something that I appreciate, because this applies to me, I feel like, is if you have finished your work, just be done. You don't have to make random work up to do to look busy or try to look for crumbs on the floor for work, right? I work hard, I work effectively, I get my job done on time, and when I finish, I'm done, right? I'll work on something else that's enjoyable to me, but I don't make up random work that is really just a waste of my time. And you don't need to know everything going on. Be happy with missing out on all the extra junk. The authors say JOMO, joy of missing out. You don't need to populate your mind with all this extra irrelevant information. Keep your life simple. And that brings us to our third point. 3, keep life good for your employees. A lot of this can be pretty straightforward. For example, keeping work expectations simple. When I first started my job, my work expectation sheet was like 2 pages long. It was gigantic. It had every possible thing they wanted me to do, and it was really just stupid, honestly. why don't you just keep your work simple? Another thing is to keep salaries consistent and transparent. Work as a team. You're not paying 5 people in the same position 5 different salaries. And I've noticed this at my job too. You have 2 employees in the same position tier, but they're getting paid differently. Like, that just feels bad. So keeping salaries consistent and grouping it with group success equals increased in pay. Another thing is to don't hire bad but qualified people, kind of like divas. Hire those who fit well with your culture. Now, I read a Google management book before, and they said it's okay to hire a diva as long as they're amazing. Like, just suck it up and accept it. But the authors here don't recommend that. They're just like, hey, you don't need that bad blood. Just get them out. Like, don't even bother. Another benefit is to offer flexible work and remote work. And employees love this. Not everybody, of course, but a lot of employees love this. And the authors have actually written a separate book about this too. This just gives a lot of people a lot more time, especially some people that live close to work probably don't care too much, right? Like when I used to live 5 minutes away from my job, who cares, right? It's a nice benefit to have, but it's a lot different than if you live an hour away in traffic. Now that's no longer a nice benefit, that's just life-changing benefit. One interesting idea was to give benefits that matter now. A lot of companies focus on retirement benefits, which are nice, and you like big numbers that go up the older you get, but they really only matter when you're 60, 65, 70 years old even. Rather, give more benefits like athletic stipends, paid vacations, periodic days off for free, etc., a little allowance to buy fresh, high-quality food. These all help people out right now. Now, I think the company of the authors right now took a step back from that and simplified things by just giving the employees more money and say, hey, your personal business, do whatever you want with it. But I think it's kind of cool to get these little stipends, little reminders to eat healthy and exercise and that kind of jazz. Now, this is a tech company the authors are in, so the profits are pretty high. How that works at another company might be a little bit more challenging, but these are just ideas. Another item, and this is discussed in a separate book, The 4-Hour Work Week, is if something's going to cause a lot of problems, maybe you shouldn't do it. If 80% of your problems are caused by 20% of your customers, just get rid of the 20% of the customers, or make it so it's not going to cause issues. And the last thing, and I think a lot of people think this, is to don't monitor people. Like it's really creepy, and you really drain the trust from your employees. There's no loyalty. And yeah, I think people justify it by saying, hey, if there's an emergency, we need to know where you're at. But your 0.0001% chance event shouldn't dictate your entire work culture. And I think being monitored is really, very stressful. It makes you tense up. It makes you work longer. You feel like even if you put in a good days of work, you need to do more just in case. Number 4, set many medium-sized, as in like 6-week goals. Rather than setting these colossal year-long or 2-year-long goals, you want something that's more flexible and you can pivot when needed. And this gives people a chance to change their minds, and your company can make slight changes in direction rather than waiting for an entire year. And the goals become much more tangible as well, because you can actually do it, right? Like if you have something due in a month and a half, you have much higher chance of doing it than setting a goal in a year. And then you forget about the goal until November, and then you're just like, oh shoot, I got to do this goal now. Having these smaller goals as well allows you to finish what you started, even though you're not exactly happy with what you had or it didn't quite go the way you wanted. It's not healthy to constantly iterate and not finish your work, which, yeah, I think if you have a micromanager, you're very well aware that it can drive you crazy to just iterate and iterate and iterate, and all your stuff is late. And the authors argue, just do good enough, but don't be paralyzed by perfection. Finish what you started. And these medium-sized goals lets you look into your scheduling. And if you really dread deadlines, and the authors say dread lines, you should really look at your process, because projects should get smaller the closer you get to the deadline. But if it's starting to get bigger for some reason as you get closer to the deadline, then something is seriously wrong. This might be internally, you might be increasing the quality of work over and over and over again and never finishing. Or it might be unrealistic to finish, or maybe you need to lower your quality, or the scope of work has changed and you really need to trim stuff off. And lastly, some of these big goals can push you to make changes that aren't healthy just to achieve the goals, especially when they're growth related. So it's good to just not stress yourself out, improve, but don't push yourself in a bad way. 5, you have agency to improve what you can. I think a lot of people complain about their employer, sometimes me included, and feel kind of hopeless to their situation or helpless. And that's always a dangerous place to be, because when you are hopeless or helpless, you have no control over your life. And the authors kind of get into, you want your life to be in your hands, right? Maybe your employer just is bad. Maybe that's an indication you need to change jobs. You can't really rely on your employer to change. They might change. Maybe you can convince them to change, but really what needs to change is you, because you are the only thing you can really control. And, sometimes barely even you can control yourself. You can start today and do little things to influence your calmness at work. And maybe you need to set expectations with people. Maybe there's going to be a tough learning curve. Maybe there's some embarrassment involved, but ultimately you have choice in the matter. And that is what I learned from It Doesn't Have to Be Crazy at Work. Now, this book had a ton of tips in it. I mentioned a ton of them, but there's more in there too. I really like this book. I hope you give it a shot too. It's easy to read and fun. If you liked what you heard, consider liking and subscribing. And I hope you give this book a shot. I'm a big proponent of having a little bit more calm workplace. My work itself is, for me, it's calm because I work on it being calm. But I talk to a lot of people and they always seem stressed out and overwhelmed. And I think a lot of people can benefit from having some more calmness in their life.